Don't touch it. Those 3 words should have been enough. But when you're counting pennies to afford ramen and the stack of bills inside a forgotten wallet could silence every creditor screaming your name, morality becomes negotiable. Alyssa Carter stood frozen in that fluorescent-lit diner at 2:15 a.m., staring at more cash than she'd seen in her entire 23 years. One choice. 2 paths. The wrong decision wouldn't just cost her, it would define her. She didn't know that returning the wallet would be the most dangerous thing she'd ever do. She didn't know someone was watching. She didn't know the money was bait. And she definitely didn't know that the man who left it there never made mistakes. If you want to see how far integrity can take you and what it costs, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The graveyard shift at Rosie's Diner had a particular kind of silence. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but hollow, like the aftermath of something that mattered. The kind of quiet that made the fluorescent lights hum louder, made the coffee smell more burnt, made every tick of the wall clock sound like a countdown. Alyssa Carter moved through that silence like a ghost, her sneakers squeaking against linoleum that had been mopped so many times the pattern had worn away to gray. Nothing. Table 6 needed clearing. Booth 9 had a ketchup stain that looked like a crime scene. The regulars, old Maurice with his crossword puzzle, the truck driver whose name she'd never learned, the college kid who'd been nursing the same cup of coffee for 3 hours, barely registered her presence. She preferred it that way. "You look like death, baby girl." Rochelle's voice cut through the quiet from behind the counter. The older woman had worked at Rosie's for 16 years, had seen 3 owners, 4 marriages in the staff, and countless dreamers like Alyssa come through those doors thinking the graveyard shift was temporary. For most of them, it wasn't. "I'm fine." Alyssa managed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired." "Tired? Honey, you're 23. You don't know what tired is." Rochelle wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her dark hands moving in circles that had become muscle memory. "When I was your age, I could work a double, go dancing, and still have energy to tell me this exact story?" Alyssa's smile became genuine for half a second. "You've mentioned it twice this week." "Don't get smart." But Rochelle was grinning. "Your break's in 10. Eat something that isn't French fries." Alyssa nodded, already calculating whether she could afford to eat anything at all. Her last paycheck had gone to rent. The one before that to textbooks she'd found used, their margins filled with some other struggling student's desperate notes. The MCAT study guide alone had cost her 2 weeks of grocery money. Medical school. The dream felt more impossible every day, but she clung to it with the same desperate grip she'd had at 17 when her guidance counselor had actually laughed, at the idea of a girl from the South Side projects becoming a doctor. "People like us don't do that, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson had said, her smile sympathetic and devastating. "Maybe nursing? That's a good, stable career." Alyssa had smiled back, said thank you, and spent the next 6 years proving her wrong out of pure spite. The door chimed. Alyssa looked up from the table she was clearing, already reaching for her order pad, already arranging her face into the pleasant but not too friendly expression that maximized tips without encouraging conversation. 2 men walked in. That alone was notable. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, customers usually trickled in alone, each one an island of insomnia or necessity. But these 2 moved together with the kind of synchronized purpose that suggested they'd walked side by side 1,000 times before. The first man was unremarkable in the deliberate way expensive things often are. Gray suit that fit too well to be off the rack, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, a face that would disappear in a crowd of businessmen. He moved like someone who'd never been afraid of anything, which meant he'd either never faced real danger or had faced it so often it had become boring. The second man was different, younger, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of nervous energy that made Alyssa's waitress instincts ping warning signals. His eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits, scanning faces, noting details. Security, she thought. Or paranoid. Maybe both. They took booth 4, the corner one that offered a view of both the door and the kitchen. The older man sat facing the entrance. The younger one sat with his back to the wall. Alyssa approached with coffee pot in hand. "Evening, gentlemen. Coffee?" "Please." The older man's voice was quiet, controlled. He didn't look at her when he spoke. his attention on the menu as if the laminated list of breakfast foods and burgers required serious consideration. She poured. The younger man tracked her movements with his eyes, and she felt the weight of his attention like static electricity. "I'll give you a minute to decide," she said, already stepping back, already reading the dynamic. The older man was in charge. The younger one was there to watch. Whatever they were doing at Rosie's diner at 2 in the morning, it wasn't about the food. She returned to her other tables, refilled Maurice's coffee, brought the truck driver his third piece of pie. But part of her attention stayed on booth 4, where the two men spoke in voices too low to hear, their heads bent together like conspirators. 20 minutes later, they left. The older man dropped 2 20s on the table for a meal that cost $12. The younger one did one final scan of the diner before following him out. Alyssa collected the money, then reached for the plates they'd barely touched. Her hand froze. There, on the vinyl seat where the older man had sat, was a wallet. Black leather. Expensive. The kind of thing that cost more than her monthly rent. She glanced toward the door. The men were gone. The parking lot empty except for Rochelle's ancient Civic and her own barely functional Honda. The wallet sat there like a test. "Don't touch it," instinct whispered. "Just call out, see if they come back." But they were already gone. And protocol said to turn it into the manager, except the manager was Harvey, who'd been skimming from the register for 6 months and thought nobody noticed. Harvey, who'd once pocketed a customer's forgotten phone and sold it the same day. Alyssa picked up the wallet. It was heavier than expected, substantial in a way that spoke of quality and care. She flipped it open. The breath left her lungs in a rush. Cash. Stacks of it. $100 bills, crisp and new, filling every slot where credit cards should be. She counted without meaning to, her fingers moving automatically. $5,000. Maybe more. No credit cards, no driver's license. Just cash and a single business card with a phone number. No name, no company, just 10 digits in plain black text. "Sweet Jesus," Rochelle breathed from behind her. Alyssa hadn't heard her approach. "Is that real?" "I think so." Alyssa's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "How much?" "A lot." They stood there for a long moment, 2 black women in a dying diner at 2:00 a.m., staring at more money than either of them would see in 6 months of graveyard shifts. The fluorescent lights hummed, the wall clock ticked. Somewhere in the kitchen, the ice machine shuddered to life. "What are you going to do?" Rochelle asked quietly. What was she going to do? The question seemed impossibly large. $5,000. Maybe 6. Enough to pay off her credit cards. Enough to stop dodging calls from bill collectors. Enough to buy textbooks new instead of used. To eat something other than ramen and whatever she could sneak from the diner kitchen. To stop choosing between electricity and groceries. Enough to feel human again, if only for a little while. Her student loan statement flashed through her mind. $47,000 and climbing. The interest accumulating faster than she could pay it down. The MCAT exam fee she couldn't afford. The application costs for medical schools that seemed to exist in a different universe than the one where she cleared tables and smiled at truckers and pretended her feet didn't hurt. "I'm going to call the number," she heard herself say. Rochelle's hand landed on her shoulder, heavy and warm. "You sure about that, baby? Nobody would know. Nobody would blame you." But Alyssa would know. And somewhere under the exhaustion and the debt and the grinding daily humiliation of poverty, there was still a 17-year-old girl who'd looked Mrs. Patterson in the eye and refused to be small. People like us don't do that. Her hand shook as she pulled out her phone. The business card felt like paper, ordinary and unremarkable, but the phone number seemed to carry weight. She dialed. It rang once, twice. "Yes?" A man's voice, calm and unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting the call. Alyssa cleared her throat. "I found a wallet at Rosie's Diner on 5th and Hamilton. I think someone left it here." Silence on the other end. Not empty silence, but the kind that suggested the person was thinking, calculating, deciding. "Describe it," the voice said finally. "Black leather, no ID, no credit cards, just cash and this phone number." "I see." Another pause. "Your name?" "Alyssa. Alyssa Carter." "Thank you, Alyssa Carter. Someone will collect it within the hour. I trust nothing is missing?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of implication in every direction. I trust nothing is missing. Not, did you take anything? But a statement of expectation, of certainty, of test passing. No, she said firmly. It's all here. Of course it is. Was that approval in his voice? Or something colder? Someone will be there soon. The line went dead. Alyssa stood there, phone still pressed to her ear, while Rochelle watched her with something that looked like pride and something else that looked like worry. Well, Rochelle said after a moment, I hope you know what you just did. I returned a wallet. Baby girl, Rochelle's voice was gentle. Nobody leaves $6,000 in cash just sitting in a diner booth by accident. Nobody. The words settled over Alyssa like cold water. She looked down at the wallet in her hand, really looked at it this time, and noticed what she'd missed before. No scuffs, no wear on the edges, no cracked leather or faded stitching. It looked brand new, as if it had been purchased specifically for tonight. What do you mean? But she already knew. She'd known from the moment the older man had walked in with his too-perfect suit and his companion who watched everything like a hawk. She'd known, and she'd made the call anyway. I mean, Rochelle said slowly, that you just passed a test you didn't know you were taking. The man who arrived 43 minutes later wasn't the one who'd left the wallet. This one was younger, maybe early 30s, with a sharp suit and sharper eyes. He walked into Rosie's like he owned it, like he owned everything, and his gaze found Alyssa immediately. Miss Carter? That's me. She held out the wallet. He didn't take it immediately, just looked at it, then at her face, as if comparing her to some mental image he'd been given. May I? He gestured to the booth where she was standing. Sure. He sat. She sat across from him, suddenly aware of her stained uniform, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, the coffee smell that had soaked into her skin and clothes. He opened the wallet, counted the money with quick, practiced movements. It's all there, Alyssa said, and hated the defensive note in her voice. I can see that. He looked up at her, and his expression shifted into something that might have been respect. Do you know what you just did? Returned a wallet? Returned $6,400 in cash when you're working a minimum wage job at 2 a.m. He leaned back, studying her. Most people wouldn't have made that call. Most people aren't trying to get into medical school. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she was tired of being tested, tired of performing, tired of proving herself to people who'd already decided what she was worth. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe. Or recognition. Medical school, that's ambitious. So I've been told. But you're going to do it anyway. It wasn't a question, but she answered it like one. Yes. He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something important. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, placed it on the table between them. This is from my employer. A thank you for your integrity. Alyssa didn't touch it. That's not necessary. He insists. I don't want it. Take it anyway. The man's voice hardened slightly. This isn't a negotiation, Ms. Carter. You did something noteworthy tonight. Accept the gratitude. She wanted to argue, wanted to push the envelope back across the table, wanted to maintain the moral high ground that felt increasingly precarious. But rent was due in 5 days, and she was already $200 short. Her hand moved before her brain caught up. She took the envelope. It was heavy, thick with what felt like more cash. There's $5,000 in there, the man said quietly. And a phone number. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, call it, day or night. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why would anyone do this for a stranger? The man stood, buttoning his jacket with smooth efficiency. Because integrity is rare, Ms. Carter, and my employer values rare things. He paused at the edge of the booth, looking back at her. One more thing. Don't mention this to anyone. Not your family, not your friends, not even that kind woman behind the counter who's pretending not to listen. Rochelle jumped slightly, then busied herself with the coffee pot. Why? Alyssa asked again. Because the kind of gratitude you've just received comes with expectations of discretion. His smile didn't reach his eyes. You understand? She didn't. Not really, but she nodded anyway. He left without another word. Through the window, she watched him climb into a black SUV that hadn't been there a moment ago, watched it pull away into the night with the kind of smooth acceleration that spoke of power and money and influence. Alyssa sat there, envelope in her hands, while her heart hammered against her ribs. What just happened? Rochelle appeared at her elbow, voice low and urgent. I don't know. Alyssa opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Cash, stacks of it, and a plain white card with another phone number, different from the first. $5,000. For returning $6,000. This is wrong, she whispered. This is all wrong. Maybe. Rochelle sat down across from her. Or maybe you just got noticed by someone who matters. Noticed. The word tasted like metal. I don't want to be noticed. I want to pay my bills and study and get into school and you will, Rochelle interrupted gently. But baby girl, that money in your hands, that's not just a thank you. That's an investment. In what? Rochelle looked at her for a long moment, her dark eyes sad and knowing. In you. Question is, what's the return they're expecting? Alyssa didn't sleep that night. She went home to her studio apartment in a building where the elevator hadn't worked in 3 years and the heat was more suggestion than fact. She sat on her second-hand couch with the envelope on her coffee table, a crate she'd found behind a furniture store and refinished herself, and stared at it like it might explode. $5,000. She'd done the right thing. She'd returned the wallet. She'd made the call when she could have just pocketed the cash and pretended she'd never seen it. So why did she feel like she'd just stepped into a trap? The phone rang at 7 o'clock a.m., jarring her out of something that wasn't quite sleep. Unknown number. Hello? Ms. Carter? A woman's voice this time, crisp and professional. This is Jennifer Cole from Hamilton University Financial Aid Office. Alyssa's stomach dropped. The university, the loans, the endless paperwork and appeals and desperate attempts to stay enrolled while working full-time. Yes? I'm calling about your account. There's been a payment made on your behalf, quite substantial actually. I wanted to confirm it with you before processing. A payment? Her mouth had gone dry. How much? $47,312, paid in full this morning via wire transfer. The room tilted. Alyssa gripped the phone so hard her knuckles went white. That's not possible. I assure you it's been verified. The transfer came from a private foundation. Paper rustled. The Harrison Educational Trust. They've also established a scholarship in your name for the remaining balance of your undergraduate degree and pending acceptance, your medical school education. No. The word came out strangled. No, that's not. I didn't apply for that. I don't know anyone named Harrison. According to our records, you were nominated by an anonymous benefactor. The trust board reviewed your academic performance and financial need and approved the full scholarship package. This is legitimate, Ms. Carter. I'm looking at the transfer confirmation right now. Alyssa's hands were shaking. Her entire body was shaking. $47,000. Her student loans, the weight she'd been carrying since she was 18, the crushing monthly payments that made her choose between food and textbooks. Gone. Just like that. Ms. Carter, are you still there? Who nominated me? Her voice barely worked. I need to know who did this. I'm sorry, but that information is confidential. The benefactor requested complete anonymity as a condition of the scholarship. Of course they did. Ms. Carter, I need verbal confirmation that you accept these terms. The scholarship comes with standard conditions, maintaining a 3.5 GPA, full-time enrollment, and quarterly progress reports to the trust. Do you accept? Say no, instinct screamed. This is wrong. This is dangerous. Say no and walk away and keep working at the diner and paying your loans like everyone else. But everyone else wasn't getting into medical school. Everyone else was drowning. Yes, she heard herself say. I accept. She hung up and immediately called the number from the first business card, the one from the wallet. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. I need to speak to whoever left the wallet. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Right now. I'm afraid that's not possible. The same calm voice from last night. But I can relay a message. Tell them I know what they did. Tell them I don't want it. Tell them to reverse the transfer and cancel the scholarship and leave me alone. Silence. Then, are you certain that's what you want, Ms. Carter? To refuse an opportunity that would change your life? To go back to working 80 hours a week while your dreams get further away? To struggle when you could thrive? I want to know what you want from me. The words came out as a shout. She pressed her hand over her mouth, breathing hard, trying to regain control. Nothing. The voice was utterly calm. My employer asks nothing except that you continue to be who you are, that you study hard, that you achieve your goals, that you become the doctor you're meant to be. Nobody does something like this for nothing. Most people don't. But my employer is not most people. A pause. Ms. Carter, you made a choice last night. You chose integrity over immediate gain. You chose to do the right thing when no one would have known if you'd done wrong. That choice has value. This scholarship is simply recognition of that value. And what happens when you decide to collect on that value? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. That's a very astute question, the voice said finally. The answer is that my employer collects nothing that isn't freely given. If you accept this scholarship, you accept it with no strings attached, no obligations, no debts, only the expectation that you will continue to be a person of integrity. I don't believe you. I don't expect you to. Not yet. The voice softened slightly. But consider this, Ms. Carter. You can refuse this help and struggle for the next decade, working yourself into exhaustion, watching your dreams slip away because the system is designed to keep people like you exactly where you are. Or you can accept a hand up from someone who recognizes your worth and wants to see you succeed. The choice is yours. But make it knowing that this offer won't come again. The line went dead. Alyssa sat there, phone still pressed to her ear, while the morning sun painted patterns on her floor. $47,000. A full scholarship. Medical school, suddenly within reach instead of perpetually distant. All because she'd returned a wallet, or all because she'd passed a test. The distinction seemed important, but she couldn't quite grasp why. 3 weeks passed. Alyssa kept working at the diner, kept studying, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. But nothing happened. The scholarship processed. Her student loans disappeared from her credit report. The financial aid office sent her a new award letter that made her cry in the university bathroom. She told no one. Not her mother, who would have asked too many questions. Not her roommate from freshman year who'd moved to Seattle and sent occasional texts. Not even Rochelle, though the older woman watched her with knowing eyes every shift. You took the money, Rochelle said one night during the 3:00 a.m. lull. It wasn't a question. I took the scholarship, Alyssa corrected. Same thing. Is it? Rochelle was quiet for a long moment, wiping down the same spot on the counter over and over. My grandmother used to say there's no such thing as free money. Everything costs something. Sometimes you just don't know the price until it's too late to give it back. That's cheerful. That's truth. Rochelle looked up at her eyes sad. I'm not saying you made the wrong choice, baby girl. I'm just saying choices have consequences. And you won't know what yours are until someone comes to collect. The door chimed. They both looked up, some instinct making them tense. A woman walked in. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of presence that made the dingy diner feel even smaller and shabbier by comparison. She sat at the counter, placed a leather portfolio in front of her, and smiled at Alyssa. Ms. Carter, do you have a moment? The bottom dropped out of Alyssa's stomach. I'm working. This will only take a minute. The woman opened the portfolio, pulled out a photograph, placed it face up on the counter. Alyssa looked down at it, looked back up at the woman. Her heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear over it. The photograph showed the older man from 3 weeks ago, the one who'd left the wallet. He was standing outside a building Alyssa recognized, had walked past 1,000 times. City Hall. And standing next to him, shaking his hand, was the mayor. His name is Victor Hahn, the woman said quietly. He owns 40% of this city's commercial real estate. He sits on the boards of 3 hospitals, 2 universities, and the Regional Transportation Authority. He's never been photographed, never given an interview, never appeared in any society pages. Most people don't even know he exists. Alyssa forced herself to breathe normally. Why are you telling me this? Because you passed his test, and now he wants to know if you're interested in a more substantial opportunity. I'm not interested in opportunities from men who test people without their knowledge. The woman smiled, and it was genuinely amused. He said you'd say something like that. He also said to tell you that the scholarship stands regardless of your answer here. No strings, remember? This is something different, something you can refuse without consequence. Then I refuse. You haven't heard the offer. I don't need to. The woman closed the portfolio with a soft snap. Fair enough, but take my card anyway, in case you change your mind. She placed it on the counter. White, heavy stock, embossed lettering. Elena Marsh, Executive Director, the Harrison Educational Trust, the same trust that had paid off her loans. Alyssa didn't touch the card. What did he want from me? The same thing he wants from everyone he invests in. Elena stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced ease. Loyalty, discretion, and the willingness to use your skills when called upon. I'm not even in medical school yet. You will be. Stanford accepted you this morning. Full ride. You'll get the letter tomorrow. The words hit like a physical blow. Stanford. She hadn't even applied to Stanford. Couldn't afford the application fee. That's not possible. Mr. Hahn makes impossible things possible. It's what he does. Elena picked up her portfolio. Think about it, Ms. Carter. You can be a good doctor at a state school, working in clinics, fighting insurance companies, burning out by 40. Or you can be a great doctor at Stanford with resources most physicians only dream about, positioned to actually make a difference in people's lives. In exchange for what? For being available when needed, for treating patients who require discretion, for remembering that the hand that lifted you up might occasionally need your skills in return. There it was. The price. The consequence Rochelle had warned about. I want to help people, Alyssa said slowly. All people, not just the ones who can afford to buy doctors. And you will. Mr. Hahn isn't asking you to abandon your principles. He's offering you the means to uphold them better than you ever could otherwise. Elena paused at the door. The choice is yours. It always has been. But make it knowing that opportunities like this don't come twice. She left. The diner felt impossibly quiet in her wake. Rochelle was staring at Alyssa with wide eyes. Stanford? Apparently. Sweet Jesus. Alyssa picked up the business card. Elena Marsh, the same trust that had freed her from debt, was now offering her everything she'd ever wanted, everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed about while her feet ached and angry customers yelled and the fluorescent lights hummed their lonely song. All she had to do was say yes to a man she'd never met, a man who owned 40% of the city, a man who tested strangers and collected people like investments, a man who saw something in her worth cultivating. The question was, what did he see? And what would it cost her when he finally decided to collect? She slipped the card into her pocket and went back to work because that's what she did. She kept moving, kept pushing, kept choosing the next right thing even when she couldn't see the full picture. But as she poured coffee and cleared tables and smiled at customers who didn't see her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd already made her choice 3 weeks ago when she'd picked up that wallet. Everything after that was just watching the consequences unfold. The Stanford acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday, tucked inside a thick cream-colored envelope that felt expensive to the touch. Alyssa held it in her hands for a full minute before opening it, standing in the narrow hallway of her apartment building where the mailboxes hung crooked on the wall and someone's cooking smells drifted through the vents. Her fingers shook as she slid the letter opener, a graduation gift from her mother, one of the few nice things she owned, along the seal. The paper inside was heavy, embossed with the university seal. She read the first line 3 times before her brain would process the words. Dear Ms. Carter, on behalf of the admissions committee, it is my great pleasure to offer you admission to the Stanford University School of Medicine. She sat down right there on the stained carpet, her back against the wall, and read the whole thing. Full scholarship, stipend for living expenses, priority consideration for research opportunities. Everything she'd fantasized about during those long night shifts when her feet hurt so badly, she wanted to cry. Everything she hadn't earned through the normal channels. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press accept. Congratulations. Victor Hahn's voice was quiet, measured, the same tone she'd heard on that first phone call. But this time she knew who she was talking to. This time the voice came with a face, with power, with implications she was only beginning to understand. How did you get my number? I've had your number since the night you called about the wallet, Ms. Carter. I've simply been waiting for the right moment to use it. She should have been afraid, should have been angry. Instead, she felt something closer to exhaustion, the kind that came from fighting a battle she'd already lost. What do you want from me? I want you to go to Stanford. I want you to become the doctor you're meant to be. I want you to save lives and break barriers and prove wrong every person who ever told you that you couldn't. And then, if the time comes when I need a doctor I can trust, I'll call you. That's all. No contracts, no obligations, just the understanding that people who help me are remembered. Alyssa leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes. Why me? You don't know me. You don't know if I'm even a good student, if I'll make it through medical school, if I know you worked 3 jobs to put yourself through undergraduate. I know you maintained a 3.87 GPA while sleeping 4 hours a night. I know you volunteer at the free clinic on Sundays even though you're barely keeping yourself fed. I know that when you found $6,000, you called the owner instead of pocketing it, even though that money would have changed your life. He paused. I know you, Alyssa Carter, better than you might think. The words should have felt invasive, creepy even. But there was something in his tone, not warmth exactly, but a kind of recognition that made her chest tight. He saw her, really saw her, not the uniform or the poverty or the struggle, but the person underneath it all. I don't know if I can accept this, she said quietly. You already did. The moment you cashed that first check, the moment you accepted the scholarship, you made your choice. This is simply the next step. What if I refuse? What if I turn down Stanford and go somewhere else? Then you go somewhere else. The scholarship will follow you wherever you choose to study. This isn't coercion, Ms. Carter. This is investment. I'm betting on you because I believe you're worth betting on. How you use that opportunity is entirely up to you. But you'll remember. I always remember. There was something almost sad in his voice. That's both my gift and my curse. I remember everyone who helps me, everyone who disappoints me, everyone who shows me who they really are when they think no one's watching. You showed me integrity. That's worth more than you know. The line went dead before she could respond. She sat there in the hallway for another 20 minutes, the acceptance letter in her lap, while her downstairs neighbor's TV blared through the thin walls and someone's baby cried and life continued on around her like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She called her mother that night, breaking her own rule about secrecy, needing to hear someone tell her she wasn't crazy for considering this. Mama, I got into Stanford. The silence on the other end lasted so long, Alyssa thought the call had dropped. Stanford, her mother finally said. Stanford Medical School? Yes. Baby. Her mother's voice broke. Baby, how? We can't afford. Full scholarship, everything paid for, living expenses, books, everything. Another long silence. When her mother spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. You did it. You actually did it. Alyssa wanted to agree, wanted to share in the joy, but the words stuck in her throat. Had she done it, or had Victor Hahn done it for her? There's something I need to tell you, she started, but her mother was already crying, already calling to Alyssa's stepfather, already celebrating in a way that made Alyssa's confession die unspoken. She couldn't take this from them, couldn't taint this moment with the truth about wallets and tests and men who owned 40% of the city. So she listened to her mother cry and laugh and praise God, and she said nothing about the price that might eventually come due. The next morning, she gave her 2 weeks' notice at Rosie's. Rochelle took it better than expected. I knew you'd be leaving soon, the older woman said, pouring them both coffee in the empty pre-dawn diner. Didn't know it would be this soon, but I knew. I'm sorry. Don't be. Rochelle settled onto the stool next to her, something she never did during a shift. You're meant for bigger things than this place. Always were. This place kept me alive. This place kept you broke and exhausted. There's a difference. Rochelle sipped her coffee, her dark eyes thoughtful. You still haven't told me who paid off your loans. A scholarship fund. Baby girl, I wasn't born yesterday. Scholarship funds don't work that fast. One day you're drowning in debt, the next day you're free and clear and Stanford's rolling out the red carpet? She shook her head. Someone powerful is pulling strings for you. Question is whether those strings come with a leash. Alyssa stared into her coffee. I don't know yet. Well, when you find out, you remember something. Free isn't free if you gotta sell yourself to get it. And I'm not talking about money. Rochelle squeezed her hand. I'm talking about who you are. Don't let anyone take that from you, no matter how much they offer in return. Those words stayed with Alyssa through her last 2 weeks at the diner, through the going-away party the staff threw her with a grocery store cake and genuine happiness, through packing up her tiny apartment and saying goodbye to the city that had shaped her. She didn't hear from Victor Hahn again. No calls, no messages, no mysterious visitors. It was as if he'd made his offer and was now waiting to see what she'd do with it, like a scientist observing an experiment. Stanford started in August. Alyssa arrived 2 weeks early, wanting to get settled, to find her bearings before the chaos of orientation began. The campus was beautiful in a way that felt almost aggressive. Perfectly manicured lawns, buildings that looked like cathedrals dedicated to knowledge. Students who moved with the confidence of people who'd never questioned whether they belonged. She questioned it every day. Her cohort was 90 students, pulled from the top universities in the country. Most of them had parents who were doctors, or lawyers, or professors. They talked about their undergraduate research like it was normal, reference papers and conferences and connections with the casual ease of people who'd grown up in this world. Alyssa had grown up in a world where the heat got shut off in winter, and dinner was sometimes just cereal and hope. She threw herself into the work with the same desperate intensity she'd brought to everything else. Anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. She studied until the words blurred on the page, until she could recite mechanisms and pathways in her sleep. She was going to earn this, going to prove she deserved to be here, going to make sure no one could ever say she'd only gotten in because of connections, even if it was true. 3 months into her first year, she met David Chen in the library at 2 a.m. He was sprawled over a table in the back corner, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, his head in his hands. You okay? She asked, because she recognized that particular brand of desperation. He looked up, and she saw the tears on his face before he could wipe them away. Pharmacology exam tomorrow. I'm going to fail. You're not going to fail. You don't know that. I know that you're here at 2 a.m. studying instead of sleeping, which means you care too much to fail. She sat down across from him. What are you stuck on? What started as a study session became a friendship. David was from San Francisco, the son of immigrants who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities they'd never had. The pressure was crushing him, the weight of expectations and debt, and the fear of disappointing everyone who'd believed in him. Alyssa understood that weight intimately. They started studying together, then eating together, then sharing the kind of exhausted vulnerability that came from surviving impossible schedules and endless pressure. He was the first person at Stanford she told about the diner, about working her way through undergrad, about the scholarship that had saved her life. She didn't tell him about Victor Hahn. Finals came and went. Alyssa passed everything, not at the top of her class, but solidly in the middle, which felt like a victory. David passed too, though barely, and they celebrated with cheap wine in his apartment and promises that second semester would be easier. It wasn't. The work got harder, the expectations higher, the pressure more intense. Students started dropping out, 1 in December, 2 in January, another in March. The administration called it normal attrition, but Alyssa saw the haunted looks on people's faces before they left, saw how close she was to that edge herself. She was in the library in late April, studying for her anatomy practical, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, too tired to deal with whatever spam caller wanted her attention. But something made her step outside, into the warm California evening, and accept the call. Ms. Carter. Victor Hahn's voice calm as ever, as if 4 months hadn't passed since their last conversation. I hope I'm not interrupting. Her heart started hammering. What do you need? Direct. I appreciate that. I need a doctor, Ms. Carter. Someone discreet. Someone skilled. Someone who understands the value of silence. I'm a first-year medical student. I can barely start an IV. I'm aware of your current limitations. This isn't a request for you to practice medicine. This is a request for your presence and your discretion while someone else provides care. I don't understand. You will. A car will pick you up from your apartment tomorrow evening at 7. Bring your medical student ID and nothing else. Tell no one where you're going. I have studying to do. I have... Ms. Carter? His voice hardened slightly. This is the call I told you might come. The understanding we had. I'm not asking for anything illegal, nothing that will compromise your education or your ethics. I'm asking for 3 hours of your time. Can you give me that? She wanted to say no, wanted to hang up and block the number and pretend this conversation had never happened. But Rochelle's words echoed in her mind. Choices have consequences. And she'd made her choice when she accepted that first check. 3 hours, she said. That's all. That's all I need. The line went dead. Alyssa stood there in the fading light, watching students hurry past with their backpacks and their certainty, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. She didn't sleep that night, every worst-case scenario playing through her mind. Illegal surgeries, drug deals, violence, the kind of things that destroyed careers before they even started. But the next evening at 7 o'clock, when the black SUV pulled up to her apartment building, she got in anyway. The driver didn't speak, didn't introduce himself, just pulled away from the curb and drove north out of Palo Alto, into the hills where the houses got bigger and further apart, and the darkness between streetlights grew longer. They drove for 40 minutes. The SUV turned onto a private road, passed through a gate that opened automatically, and wound up a driveway lined with trees. At the top sat a house that Alyssa's tired brain initially categorized as a mansion before correcting to estate. Maybe compound. Stone and glass and modern architecture that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood back home. The car stopped at the front entrance. The driver got out, opened her door without a word. Elena Marsh was waiting inside, her expensive suit traded for slacks and a blouse, her expression unreadable. Miss Carter, thank you for coming. Do I have a choice? You always have a choice, but I'm glad you made this one. Elena gestured down a hallway. This way, please. They walked through rooms that belonged in magazines, art that Alyssa vaguely recognized as famous, furniture that looked like it had been custom-made, views through floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the lights of the valley below like scattered stars. Elena stopped at a heavy wooden door. What you see beyond this point stays confidential. You'll be asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement before you leave. Breaking it would have serious legal and personal consequences. Do you understand? What exactly am I about to see? A medical situation that requires privacy. Elena opened the door. Mr. Hahn is waiting. The room beyond was set up like a hospital room, complete with monitors and IV stands and equipment that looked both expensive and highly specialized. In the bed lay a man in his 60s, unconscious, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. A ventilator. Alyssa recognized the setup from her clinical rotations. Victor Hahn stood by the window, backlit by the city lights, his silhouette sharp and still. Miss Carter. He turned, and for the first time she got a good look at his face. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, with the kind of ageless quality that came from money and good genetics and stress that had carved itself into the lines around his eyes. Thank you for coming. Who is he? She nodded at the patient. My oldest friend, the man who saved my life 30 years ago when I had nothing. He was in a car accident 3 days ago, traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. The hospital stabilized him, but he needs ongoing care that I can't trust to the general system. Why not? Because he has enemies who would love to know he's vulnerable right now. Because hospitals have leaks and reporters and people who sell information. Because privacy is the only protection I can offer him. Alyssa moved closer to the bed, her medical training kicking in despite her reservations. The monitors showed stable vitals. The ventilator settings looked appropriate. Someone who knew what they were doing had set this up. You have a medical team, she said, noting the quality of the equipment. I have a doctor who makes house calls for situations like this, but he's one person and he needs sleep. I need someone I can trust to sit with my friend overnight, to monitor the machines, to call for help if something changes. Victor's voice was steady, but she heard the emotion underneath. I need someone who understands that this man's life matters more than money or influence or connections. You have a lot of people you could call for this. I have a lot of people who work for me. I have very few I trust. He looked at her directly. You returned my wallet when you could have kept it. You made the harder choice because it was the right one. That tells me you're someone who sees people, not just what they can do for you. I'm a first-year medical student. I'm not qualified to... You're qualified to watch monitors and make a phone call if the numbers change. That's all I'm asking. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, and showed her the screen. This is Dr. Morrison's number. He's 15 minutes away. If anything, and I mean anything, looks concerning, you call him. He'll walk you through it or come back immediately. Alyssa looked at the man in the bed. Someone's friend. Someone's father, maybe. Someone who'd saved Victor Hahn's life and was now depending on strangers for his own. 3 hours? She asked. Until midnight. Then Dr. Morrison returns for the night shift. She nodded slowly. I'll need to see his chart, know his baseline, understand what normal looks like for him specifically. Something shifted in Victor's expression. Approval, maybe. Or relief. Of course, Dr. Morrison left detailed notes. He handed her a tablet. Everything's here. Medications, vitals, trends, concerns to watch for. Alyssa took it, already scrolling through the information with the focused intensity she brought to her studies. The patient's name was James Lynn, 63. The car accident had been severe. Someone had T-boned his vehicle at an intersection. Drunk driver, the note said. The other driver had walked away with minor injuries while James fought for his life. The unfairness of it made her throat tight. I'll watch him, she said. But Mr. Hahn, after tonight we're even. The scholarship, the help, all of it. This pays whatever debt you think I owe. Victor studied her for a long moment. You don't owe me a debt, Ms. Carter. You never did. This is just me asking someone I respect for help with something that matters. He moved toward the door. I'll be in my office if you need anything. Second door on the left. He left her alone with the patient and the machines and the weight of responsibility she wasn't trained for. The first hour passed slowly. Alyssa checked the monitors every 5 minutes, compared the numbers to the baseline in the chart, made notes of her own, even though no one had asked her to. Medical school had taught her that documentation mattered, that patterns emerged when you paid attention, that being thorough was never wasted effort. James Lynn's vitals stayed stable, heart rate steady, blood pressure good, oxygen saturation perfect. The ventilator breathed for him with mechanical regularity, and Alyssa found herself matching her own breathing to its rhythm. She wondered what he'd been doing when the drunk driver hit him, where he'd been going, who was waiting for him to come home. The chart said he was unconscious but stable, that the brain swelling was decreasing, that there was hope for recovery. But it didn't say whether he'd wake up the same person, whether he'd remember his life before, whether he'd be able to walk or talk or recognize the people who loved him. Medicine, she was learning, was full of these terrible uncertainties. At hour 2, she texted David. Can't study tonight. Something came up. Cover for me if anyone asks. He responded immediately. Everything okay? Yeah, just family stuff. The lie tasted bitter, but she didn't know what else to say. How could she explain where she was? What she was doing? Why she was sitting in a mansion watching over a stranger because a man who owned half the city had asked her to? The door opened quietly. Victor Hahn entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, handed her one without asking if she wanted it. How is he? Victor asked, his eyes on his friend. Stable, no changes. That's good. Changes would be bad right now. He sat in the chair beside her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion on his face, the worry he was trying to hide. James and I met when we were 19. I was working construction, trying to save money for college. He was the site supervisor. He saw something in me, I guess. Took me under his wing, taught me about business, about leverage, about seeing opportunities where other people saw obstacles. He sounds like a good man. The best. When I started buying properties, he was the one who helped me navigate the legal systems, who introduced me to the right people, who warned me about the wrong ones. He never asked for anything in return, Just kept showing up, kept helping, kept being the kind of friend most people never find. Alyssa sipped her coffee. It was good, better than anything she'd had in months. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked why I picked you. Why I paid off your loans and got you into Stanford and called you here tonight. He looked at her finally, his dark eyes intense. It's because when I see someone with potential being crushed by a system that doesn't care, I remember being 19 and broke and desperate. I remember James taking a chance on me, and I think about how many brilliant people never get that chance, never find that person who sees past their circumstances to who they could become. So this is paying it forward. This is refusing to let talent go to waste. You're going to be an extraordinary doctor, Ms. Carter, but only if you survive long enough to finish your training, only if debt doesn't crush you, if exhaustion doesn't break you, if the system doesn't grind you down until you give up like so many others do. He paused. I don't help everyone. I can't. But when I see someone like you, someone who chooses integrity over convenience, who works herself to exhaustion pursuing a dream everyone says is impossible, I help, because the world needs more doctors like the one you're going to become. You don't know what kind of doctor I'll be. I know you're sitting here at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, watching over a stranger, checking monitors you barely understand because I asked you to. I know you've read his chart 3 times, looking for anything you might have missed. I know you care about getting this right, about being worthy of the trust I've placed in you. He smiled slightly. That tells me everything I need to know. They sat in silence after that, watching James breathe, watching the monitors trace their steady patterns, watching the night deepen outside the windows. At 11:45, Dr. Morrison arrived, a tired-looking man in his 60s who reviewed Alyssa's notes with careful attention and thanked her for being thorough. You'll make a good doctor, he said, and somehow that simple statement from a practicing physician meant more than any grade she'd received. Elena appeared to drive her back to campus. In the car, Alyssa signed the non-disclosure agreement without reading it carefully, too exhausted to care about the legal language. Mr. Hahn wanted me to give you this, Elena said, handing her an envelope. Alyssa didn't open it until she was back in her apartment. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a handwritten note. Thank you for your time and your discretion. Use this for whatever you need. You've earned it. VH. She stared at the check for a long time. $5,000 for 3 hours of watching monitors. It was absurd. It was generous. It was another link in a chain she couldn't quite see the shape of yet. She deposited the check the next morning and used it to pay off her credit cards. The freedom from that particular debt felt almost as good as the loan payoff had. But freedom, she was learning, was a relative term, because now Victor Hahn had called in his favor once, which meant he could call again. And next time, she might not have the option to refuse. Second year started with James Lynn walking out of the rehabilitation facility on his own 2 feet. Victor sent Alyssa a photo. Just that. No message. And she stared at it for 10 minutes, remembering the man she'd watched breathe through a machine, remembering how fragile life had seemed in that moment. The recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Dr. Morrison had told her during a follow-up call she hadn't expected. Against all odds, James had not only survived but was regaining function, speech, memory. Modern medicine combined with extraordinary care, the doctor had said, but Alyssa heard what he didn't say. Money bought miracles that most people never got. She framed the photo and kept it on her desk, a reminder of something she couldn't quite articulate. That night in Victor's house had changed her understanding of what medicine could be when resources weren't the limiting factor, when a patient's wealth determined not just their comfort, but their survival. It was a truth she'd always known intellectually, but experiencing it firsthand had carved the knowledge deeper, made it personal in a way that lectures and statistics never could. Classes were harder now, the material more complex, the expectations more demanding. Pathology and pharmacology dominated her schedule, along with her first real clinical rotations where she actually touched patients instead of just reading about them. She worked in the free clinic on weekends still, partly because she'd always done it, and partly because she needed to remember what medicine looked like for people who couldn't buy their way out of suffering. David was struggling. She could see it in the way his hands shook during procedures, in the dark circles under his eyes that never faded, in the panic attacks he tried to hide in the bathroom between rounds. He'd failed his pharmacology midterm, and was on academic probation, one more failure away from dismissal. "I can't do this," he told her one night in November, his voice breaking. They were in her apartment, textbooks spread across her coffee table, his attempts at studying abandoned in favor of staring at the wall. "I'm not smart enough. I'm not fast enough. I'm going to fail and disappoint everyone and waste all the money my parents spent." "Stop." Alyssa grabbed his shoulders, made him look at her. "You are smart enough. You're here, aren't you? You passed first year. You're going to pass second year too." "You don't know that." "I know you're not giving up, not on my watch." She pulled out her laptop, opened a shared document. "We're making a study plan. Every night, 2 hours, we go through the material together. You're not failing, David. I won't let you." They studied together every night after that, her apartment becoming their war room against the endless tide of medical knowledge they were expected to absorb and regurgitate on command. She explained concepts he didn't understand. He challenged her assumptions and made her think deeper, and together they survived what neither of them could have managed alone. It was during one of these late-night sessions in early December that her phone rang. Unknown number. Her stomach dropped even before she answered, some instinct recognizing the pattern. "Ms. Carter," Victor's voice, and this time she heard the strain in it immediately. "I need you to come to the house, now." "What happened?" "James collapsed an hour ago. Dr. Morrison is with him, but—" He paused, and in that pause she heard fear, real and raw. "We need another pair of hands, someone we can trust." "I'm still a student. I can't—" "Please." The word came out rough, stripped of his usual control. "I'm asking you to help my friend. That's all." She looked at David, at the textbooks, at the normal life she'd been living for the past 6 months, where Victor Hahn was just a name and a photo on her desk, and not a voice on the phone asking for things she wasn't qualified to give. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. David's eyes went wide. "Where are you going?" "Family emergency. I'm sorry. I have to—" "Alyssa, what's going on? You've been weird for months, disappearing at odd hours, getting mysterious phone calls." "I can't explain right now. I'm sorry. Just trust me, okay?" She grabbed her coat and her medical bag, a gift from her mother when she'd started clinical rotations, and ran for her car before he could ask more questions she couldn't answer. The drive to Victor's estate passed in a blur of panic and adrenaline. She'd done more rotations now, had more hands-on experience, but she was still just a second-year student. If James was seriously ill, if something had gone catastrophically wrong, she had no business being anywhere near him. But Victor had asked, and she'd said yes, and those two facts combined to pull her up the dark driveway to the house where every window blazed with light. Elena met her at the door, her usual composure cracked around the edges. "Upstairs. Third door on the right. Dr. Morrison is—" Alyssa didn't wait for the rest. She took the stairs 2 at a time, following the sound of voices, and burst into a bedroom that had been transformed into a miniature ICU. James was on the bed, conscious but clearly in distress, his breathing labored and his skin pale and clammy. Dr. Morrison was establishing an IV line with practiced efficiency, while a nurse Alyssa didn't recognize monitored vitals. "Ms. Carter?" Dr. Morrison looked up, relief flashing across his face. "Good. I need you to take over compressions if his heart stops. Can you do that?" "Yes." The answer came automatically, her training overriding her fear. She'd practiced CPR 100 times on dummies, had done it twice on real patients during rotations, had the rhythm memorized in her bones. "What happened?" she asked, moving to the bedside, her eyes scanning the monitors. "Pulmonary embolism. Blood clot broke off from his leg, traveled to his lungs. We've given him anticoagulants, but he's decompensating fast. Heart rate's climbing, oxygen saturation dropping." Dr. Morrison's hands moved steadily as he spoke, starting a second IV line. "We need to get him to a hospital." "No." Victor's voice from the doorway, sharp and absolute. "No hospitals. Mr. Hahn, with all due respect, he needs interventional radiology, possibly surgery, which you can arrange here. You've done it before." "That was different. That was planned. This is— I don't care what it takes, how much it costs, who you have to call. My friend does not go to a hospital where anyone can access his records, where reporters can camp outside, where his enemies can find him vulnerable." Victor moved into the room, his face carved from stone but his eyes desperate. You told me you could handle anything here. Handle this. Dr. Morrison and Victor stared at each other for a long moment, some conversation happening in the silence that Alyssa couldn't decode. Finally, the doctor nodded. I'll need equipment, ultrasound, catheterization supplies, possibly a thoracotomy kit if we have to go surgical. And I'll need to call in a vascular surgeon I trust. Done. Elena will coordinate everything. Victor's attention shifted to Alyssa. What can she do? Monitor vitals. Alert me to any changes. If he arrests, start compressions immediately while I prepare medications. Dr. Morrison met her eyes. Can you handle that? Yes, sir. The next 3 hours were the longest of Alyssa's life. She stood by James's bedside, eyes locked on the monitors, calling out numbers every 5 minutes. Heart rate 130, oxygen saturation 88%, blood pressure 140/95. She watched the lines spike and fall, watched the numbers climb and drop, watched a man fight for his life while equipment was rushed in and a surgeon arrived in street clothes and the bedroom transformed into an operating theater. Dr. Morrison worked with calm precision, guided a catheter through James's femoral vein with ultrasound guidance, delivered medication directly to the clot. The vascular surgeon stood ready with a scalpel, prepared to crack James's chest if the minimally invasive approach failed. Alyssa had seen procedures in the hospital, had watched surgeons work with detached professional interest, but this was different. This was a man she'd sat with, whose friend had trusted her enough to call her here, whose life hung in a balance that her inexperienced hands might tip one way or another. Saturation's dropping, she called out. 85%, heart rate 145. Increase oxygen to 100%, Dr. Morrison ordered. The nurse adjusted the settings. Come on, James, come on. Victor stood in the corner, absolutely still, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Alyssa had never seen someone radiate such tightly controlled terror. This was what love looked like, she realized. Not the romantic kind, but the deeper kind that came from decades of friendship, from shared history, from the knowledge that some people were irreplaceable. Saturation's rising, she said, hardly daring to breathe. 87, 89, 92. Heart rate decreasing, 135, 128. He's responding. Dr. Morrison's voice carried relief. The medication's working. Keep monitoring. Time stretched and compressed. Alyssa called out numbers until her voice went hoarse. The surgeon eventually left, his services not needed, replaced by a critical care nurse who would stay through the night. Doctor. Morrison finally stepped back from the bedside, pulling off his gloves, exhaustion written in every line of his body. He's stable. The clot is dissolving. He's not out of danger yet, but he's past the critical point. Victor's shoulders dropped, the tension bleeding out of him all at once. Thank you, both of you. Don't thank me yet. He needs 24-hour monitoring, continued anticoagulation, and if he develops any complications, I understand. Victor's voice was quiet. Whatever he needs, whatever it takes. Dr. Morrison nodded, then looked at Alyssa. You did well tonight. Most second-year students would have panicked. You stayed focused. The praise felt unearned. She'd just called out numbers, had done the medical equivalent of reading a speedometer. But she saw the approval in his eyes and understood that in a crisis, staying calm was its own kind of skill. Get some rest, Dr. Morrison told her. I'll stay with him tonight. Elena appeared to drive her home, but this time Alyssa's hands were shaking too badly to sign anything. Elena noticed, pulled over at a rest stop, bought her hot coffee from a machine. First time seeing someone nearly die? Elena asked gently. No, I've seen it in the hospital, but this was personal. I know. Elena sipped her own coffee. Mr. Hahn doesn't let many people into his inner circle. The fact that he called you tonight means he trusts you. That's not something he gives lightly. I'm just a student. I barely did anything. You showed up. You stayed calm. You did what was asked of you without hesitation. Elena looked at her directly. Do you know what most people would have done? They would have refused, would have said it wasn't their responsibility, wasn't their problem, wasn't worth the risk. But you came. That matters to him. Why does he care so much about James? I know they're friends, but this level of James saved his life, literally. 30 years ago, when Mr. Han was starting out, he made some enemies. The kind that don't just sue you or ruin your business. The kind that put bullets in people. Elena's voice was matter of fact. James took one of those bullets, stepped between Mr. Han and a gun without hesitation. Spent 6 months recovering, nearly died twice. Mr. Han has spent the last 3 decades making sure James wants for nothing, making sure he's protected, making sure he never has reason to regret that choice. The story settled over Alyssa like weight. She understood loyalty, understood debt, understood the kind of bond that forms when someone literally bleeds for you. But she also understood that she was now part of that inner circle, bound by the same expectations of loyalty and discretion that Victor demanded from everyone he trusted. What if I want out? The question came out before she could stop it. What if I don't want to be the person he calls when something goes wrong? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then you tell him that. Mr. Han doesn't force anyone to stay in his orbit, but understand that walking away means walking away from everything. The scholarship, the support, the connections. He helps people who help him. That's how it works. That sounds like coercion. It's transaction. He's been very clear about that from the beginning. He invested in you because he believed you had integrity and potential. In return, he expects that when he needs someone with those qualities, you'll answer the call. Elena started the car again. But if that's not a bargain you want to keep, tell him. He'll respect your choice. Alyssa rode the rest of the way in silence, Elena's words circling in her head. Transaction, investment, return. The language of business applied to human relationships, reducing trust and loyalty to ledger entries. But wasn't that what medical school was too? An investment of time and money and sanity in exchange for a career, for respect, for the ability to help people? Wasn't every relationship in her life some form of transaction when examined closely enough? It was nearly 4 in the morning when she got back to her apartment. David was asleep on her couch, textbooks scattered around him, a note on the coffee table. Hope everything's okay. Finish the study guide. Wake me when you get back. She looked at him, her friend who was struggling, who trusted her, who didn't ask questions when she disappeared because he respected her boundaries even when it clearly worried him. That was friendship without transaction, loyalty without expectation of return. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe she helped him study and he helped keep her grounded, and that was its own form of exchange, just one that felt cleaner because money wasn't involved. She was too tired for philosophy. She covered David with a blanket, turned off the lights, and fell into bed still wearing her clothes. Her phone woke her 6 hours later. Text message from an unknown number. James is stable. Thank you for last night. VH. Just that. No demands, no expectations, just gratitude. She texted back, glad he's okay. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, I know I ask a lot of you. I know this isn't what you signed up for. If you want to step back, I'll understand. Alyssa stared at the message for a full minute. Here it was, the out Elena had mentioned. Permission to walk away, to go back to being just another medical student with loans and dreams and a normal future. Her fingers moved across the screen. I'm not stepping back, but I need to know, are there going to be more calls like last night? The response came quickly. Honestly, I don't know. I hope not, but I can't promise that. Then I need something in return. A longer pause this time, then, name it. When I finish medical school, I want to work in underserved communities. I want to open a clinic in a neighborhood like the one I grew up in, where people can't afford to see a doctor, where kids go without treatment because their parents don't have insurance. She took a breath. I want your help making that happen, not money. I want connections, resources, the kind of institutional support that turns ideas into reality. The 3 dots pulsed for almost a minute. Finally, you have my word. When you're ready to build that clinic, I'll make sure it happens. In writing, my attorney will draft something this week. Elena will bring it to you. Alyssa set the phone down, her heart hammering. She'd just negotiated with a man who owned half the city, had leveraged his need for her discretion into a promise that could change thousands of lives. It felt powerful and terrifying in equal measure. David stirred on the couch, blinking awake. What time is it? Almost 11. Sorry I didn't wake you. Is everything okay? With your family? She looked at him, at his sleep-rumpled hair and concerned expression, and made a decision. My family's fine, but I need to tell you something, and you need to promise not to tell anyone else. His eyes sharpened. Alyssa, if you're in trouble, I'm not in trouble. I'm in a complicated situation that I'm trying to navigate, and I need someone to help me think through it. Someone I trust. She sat down next to him. Remember when I told you about the scholarship that paid off my loans? Yeah, you said it was from an educational trust. It is. But the person who nominated me for it, the person who's funding my entire education, is a man named Victor Hahn, and he occasionally asks me to help with medical situations that require discretion. David's expression went from confused to alarmed in seconds. What kind of medical situations? Legal ones, legitimate ones, but involving people who need privacy. Last night, a patient I'd helped before had a pulmonary embolism. I assisted while a doctor treated him. That's all. No illegal activity, no sketchy stuff, just watching monitors and calling out vitals. And in exchange, this guy pays for your medical school. In exchange, I get to be here instead of drowning in debt like you are. I get to focus on learning instead of working 3 jobs. I get to actually have a future in medicine instead of just dreaming about it. David was quiet, processing. Do you trust him? This Victor Hahn? I don't know. He's kept every promise he's made. He hasn't asked me to do anything unethical, but I also know that people don't give away hundreds of thousands of dollars without expecting something in return eventually. So what are you going to do? I negotiated. Told him that when I finish residency, I want to open a clinic in an underserved neighborhood. He's going to help make it happen. She looked at David. I'm using his resources to build something good. That feels like the right way to balance this. Or you're justifying a deal with someone who might ask for something you can't give. The words hit hard because they echoed her own fears. Maybe. But I'm going to medical school. I'm going to become a doctor. And I'm going to help people who look like me, who grew up where I did, who've been told their whole lives that people like them don't get to have dreams. If working with Victor Hahn gets me there faster and lets me build something bigger than I could alone, isn't that worth it? David leaned back, rubbing his face. I don't know. I really don't. But I know you, and I know you're not stupid or naive. If you think this is the right choice, I trust your judgment. Even if it might blow up in my face? Even then. But promise me something. What? If he ever asks you to do something that compromises who you are, if he ever crosses a line, you walk away, no matter what it costs. Because the Alyssa who returned that wallet instead of keeping it, that's the person who's going to be an amazing doctor. Don't let him take that from you. She nodded, throat tight. I promise. They spent the rest of the day studying, falling back into their routine, but something had shifted. David knew now, which meant she wasn't carrying this secret alone anymore. It should have felt like relief, but instead it felt like she'd just made him complicit in something he didn't fully understand. The contract arrived 3 days later. Elena brought it to her apartment in person, along with a lawyer who explained every clause in detail. It was straightforward. Victor would provide institutional support for establishing a community health clinic upon Alyssa's completion of medical school and residency, including but not limited to real estate acquisition, legal services, connections to hospital systems, and introductions to potential donors and partners. In return, Alyssa would maintain discretion about her interactions with Victor and provide medical consultation when requested, within the bounds of her licensing and ethical obligations. What does medical consultation mean? Alyssa asked. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, smiled. It means exactly what it says. He might call and ask your opinion on a medical matter. You provide that opinion if you're comfortable doing so. It doesn't obligate you to treat anyone, doesn't require you to do anything illegal or unethical, and specifically exempts you from any requests that would violate medical ethics or licensing laws. And if I refuse a request, then you refuse. The only consequence is that he might not call again, but the support for your clinic remains intact. It's not contingent on your continued availability. Alyssa read through the contract twice, had the lawyer explain 3 clauses she didn't understand, then signed it. Victor's signature was already there, bold and confident, and she wondered what it meant that he'd signed before she had, committing himself before knowing if she'd agree. Trust, maybe, or certainty that she would. Finals came in December, brutal and exhausting. Alyssa passed everything, not brilliantly, but solidly, and felt the same relief she'd felt after first-year exams. David passed too, barely scraping by in pharmacology, but making it through. "We survived," he said over cheap celebratory pizza. "One more year of hell, and then rotations. Then residency. Then fellowships. Then we're actually doctors." He raised his beer bottle. "To surviving." "To surviving," she echoed, and tried not to think about the phone calls that might come, about the promises she'd made, about the complicated web of obligation and opportunity she'd woven around herself. Winter break should have been restful. Instead, Alyssa spent it working at the free clinic, seeing patients who came in with problems that should have been caught months ago but weren't, because they couldn't afford regular care. A man with diabetes whose blood sugar was so poorly controlled he was headed for kidney failure. A woman with a lump in her breast she'd been ignoring for a year. A child with asthma using an inhaler that had expired 2 years ago because her mother couldn't afford a new prescription. This was why she was becoming a doctor, not for the Victor Hahns of the world, who could buy health and hire private physicians and build ICUs in their bedrooms. For the people who slipped through the cracks, who suffered in silence, who deserved better than a system designed to profit from their pain. She took photos of the clinic, the peeling paint, the secondhand furniture, the ancient computers that barely worked. She made notes about what a properly funded facility could look like, how many more patients they could serve, what kind of impact real resources could make. When she sent the photos to Victor with a simple message, "This is why I'm doing this," he responded within an hour. "Then let's make sure you get to do it right." It felt like a promise, or maybe a prophecy. Time would tell which one it really was. Third year transformed everything. Clinical rotations meant real patients, real consequences, real medicine instead of textbooks and theory. Alyssa moved through surgery, internal medicine, pediatrics, and emergency medicine with the focused intensity of someone who knew exactly why she was there. Every patient became a lesson, every mistake a chance to improve, every small success a reminder that she was finally doing what she'd dreamed about since she was 17. David struggled through surgery, excelled in psychiatry, and surprised everyone, including himself, by falling in love with pediatrics. They still studied together when their schedules aligned, still propped each other up through the impossible hours and the emotional exhaustion of watching people suffer. "I think I want to do child psychiatry," he told her one night in March, his voice tentative like he expected her to laugh. "Working with kids who have trauma, who need someone to actually listen to them. I think that's where I could make a real difference." "You'd be amazing at that," Alyssa said, and meant it. "You actually see people, David. Not just symptoms or diagnoses. That's rare." "Learned it from you," he smiled. "You taught me that patients are people first. Everything else is secondary." The word stayed with her through her emergency medicine rotation, where the volume of human suffering sometimes felt impossible to process. Gunshot wounds and overdoses, heart attacks and strokes, children with broken bones and adults with broken spirits. She learned to move fast, think faster, make decisions with incomplete information because waiting for certainty meant people died. She also learned that she was good at it. The pressure that paralyzed some students sharpened her focus. The chaos that overwhelmed others became a puzzle she could solve through training and instinct and refusing to panic. Her attending physicians noticed, started giving her more responsibility, started talking about her like she might actually have a future in emergency medicine. The thought excited and terrified her in equal measure. Emergency medicine meant unpredictable hours, high stress, constant exposure to trauma. But it also meant being there for people in their worst moments, being the person who could make the difference between life and death. It meant being exactly the kind of doctor Victor Hahn needed. The thought arrived unbidden one night during a trauma case. A stabbing victim, young man bleeding out on the table while she helped the resident pack the wound and prep for emergency surgery. Her hands moved automatically, her training overriding her fear, and somewhere in the controlled chaos she realized this was what Victor had seen in her from the beginning. The ability to stay calm when everything was falling apart, the willingness to show up when called, the refusal to let fear dictate her choices. She'd been auditioning for this role since the night she returned that wallet, and she'd passed every test without realizing there were tests at all. The stabbing victim survived. Alyssa went home at 3 in the morning, scrubbed blood from under her fingernails, and slept for 4 hours before starting another shift. This was her life now, and she was too tired to question whether it was the life she'd chosen or the life that had chosen her. Victor's call came in late April, just after midnight, jarring her awake from the first deep sleep she'd had in days. "I need you." His voice was different this time, not calm and controlled, but raw with something that sounded like desperation. "Right now, it's urgent." What happened? She was already getting dressed, muscle memory taking over. "There's been an incident. Someone's hurt. Badly. I can't explain over the phone. Elena's on her way to you." "Victor, I'm not a doctor yet. If this is serious, you need to call 911. "I'm calling you. Please, Alyssa. I wouldn't ask if there was any other option." The line went dead. Alyssa stood in her dark apartment, heart hammering, every instinct screaming that this was the moment Rochelle had warned her about. The moment when the price became clear, when the debt came due, when she had to decide who she really was. Elena arrived in 8 minutes, driving with controlled urgency that suggested this was very bad indeed. "What happened?" Alyssa demanded as she slid into the car. "There was an altercation. Someone Victor cares about was injured, stabbed. He's losing a lot of blood." Elena's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Dr. Morrison is out of the country. The backup physician we usually call had a heart attack last week. You're the only person Victor trusts who has any medical training." "I'm a third-year medical student. I've assisted in trauma cases, but I've never been the primary." "You'll have to be tonight." The drive took 30 minutes, every second of which Alyssa spent mentally reviewing everything she knew about traumatic injuries, about blood loss, about the difference between stabilizing a patient and saving their life. She wasn't qualified for this. She could be expelled from medical school for practicing medicine without a license. She could kill someone through inexperience, but Victor had called her, had said please, had trusted her with someone's life. The estate was different when they arrived, tense with fear, lights blazing, people moving with barely controlled panic. Elena led her not to the bedroom where James had been treated, but to a ground-floor room that had been hastily converted into something approximating an operating theater. Medical supplies were scattered across tables. Someone had hung IV bags from a coat rack. And on a table in the center of the room, bleeding through towels that were already soaked red, was a young man who couldn't have been more than 25. Victor stood beside him, pressing gauze to a wound in the man's abdomen, his expensive shirt ruined with blood, his face carved from desperation. "Alyssa, thank God." He looked at her with so much hope it physically hurt. "This is Marcus. He's been stabbed, twice, once in the abdomen, once in the upper chest. He's losing blood faster than I can control it." Alyssa moved to the table, her training overriding her terror. She checked the young man's pulse, rapid and thready. His skin was pale, clammy, his breathing shallow. He was conscious but barely, his eyes unfocused with shock and pain. "Marcus, can you hear me?" She leaned close. "I'm Alyssa. I'm going to help you." He tried to speak but only managed a weak moan. "How long ago was he stabbed?" she asked Victor. "Maybe 40 minutes. We got him here as fast as we could." 40 minutes of uncontrolled bleeding. Jesus. She pulled back the towels covering his abdomen and had to force herself not to react to the severity of the wound. Deep penetrating trauma, likely into the peritoneal cavity. The chest wound was higher, possibly involving the lung. "I need better light. I need sterile gloves, saline, suture kits, anything you have that's surgical grade." Her voice came out steady, even though her hands wanted to shake. "And I need someone to call 911 right now because this is beyond what I can—" "No." Victor's voice was absolute. "No hospitals, no police, no records. He could die. He will die if we take him to a hospital. The people who did this have connections everywhere. They'll finish what they started if they find out where he is." Alyssa stared at him, understanding crystallizing with horrible clarity. This wasn't a random mugging. This was intentional, targeted violence. Marcus was someone's target, someone's victim, and Victor was protecting him the only way he knew how, by keeping him hidden, keeping him off any official grid. "I can't do this alone," she said. "I'm not qualified. I don't have the training. You have more training than anyone else here. You've done trauma rotations. You've assisted in surgeries. You know what to do even if you've never done it yourself." Victor's eyes locked on hers. "I'm asking you to try. That's all. Just try." She looked at Marcus, at his pale face and his labored breathing and the blood soaking through the towels despite Victor's pressure. She thought about every trauma case she'd observed, every procedure she'd assisted with, every lesson she'd absorbed through repetition and fear and desperate study. She thought about the 17-year-old girl who'd refused to be told she couldn't become a doctor. "Get me those supplies. Now. And someone find me every medical textbook in this house. Emergency surgery, trauma protocols, anything." She pulled on the gloves someone handed her with shaking fingers. "And pray I remember everything I've learned." The next 4 hours existed in a bubble of concentrated terror. Alyssa worked with hands that wanted to shake but didn't, following protocols she'd only observed, making decisions based on partial knowledge and desperate intuition. She irrigated wounds with saline because she didn't have proper surgical irrigation. She sutured blood vessels she could barely see because the lighting was wrong and the angle was bad, and she'd never done this without a licensed physician supervising every move. Victor stayed beside her the entire time, his hands steady as he followed her instructions to hold retractors, to apply pressure, to hand her instruments from the sterilized kits Elena kept producing from somewhere. He didn't speak unless she asked him questions, didn't question her decisions, just trusted her in a way that felt both empowering and crushing. Marcus arrested once. His heart stopped, the monitor they'd rigged up going flat, and Alyssa had to do compressions while Victor bagged him, had to shock him with a defibrillator she'd never used outside of training, had to watch him die and come back because she refused to let him go. "Come on, Marcus," she heard herself saying, her voice hoarse. "Come on, don't you dare die on me. Don't you dare." His heart restarted. The monitor beeped. She went back to suturing. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, she tied off the last suture and stepped back. Marcus was alive. Stable. His vitals were poor but improving. She'd stopped the bleeding, repaired what she could reach, and done everything her limited training allowed. It might be enough. It might not. But she'd done what Victor asked. She'd tried. She pulled off her gloves with hands that were finally shaking, leaving bloody prints on everything she touched. Victor caught her before her knees buckled, guided her to a chair someone had brought into the room. "You saved his life." His voice was thick with emotion. "You saved him." "I don't know that yet. He could still develop sepsis, could have internal bleeding I missed, could—" Her voice broke. "I'm not a doctor, Victor. I'm a student who just committed about 15 different violations that could get me expelled and probably arrested, and you're a healer who saved a young man's life when no one else could." Victor knelt in front of her chair, met her eyes. "Marcus is my nephew, my sister's only child. The people who did this want to hurt me by hurting my family. Taking him to a hospital would have been signing his death warrant. You gave him a chance he wouldn't have had otherwise." The words settled over her like lead. His nephew, family. The stakes had never been clearer, and she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "I need you to understand something," she said quietly. "What I did tonight, it was emergency medicine at best, malpractice at worst. If he develops complications, if something goes wrong that a real surgeon could have prevented, then I'll handle it. You won't be blamed. You won't be exposed. I'll protect you the same way you protected him. That's not the point. The point is that I could have killed him. I could have made a mistake that costs him his life. And you put that on me, Victor. You asked me to play doctor when I'm not qualified, and I said yes because you made it impossible to say no." Victor was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. I put an impossible choice in front of you, but I also know who you are. You would have tried to save him even if I hadn't asked, even if there were no scholarship, no contract, no promises between us. Because that's what you do. You show up for people who need help." The truth of it stung. He was right. She would have tried anyway, would have done exactly what she'd done because walking away and letting someone die wasn't in her DNA. But that didn't make it okay. "When Marcus is stable enough to move, he goes to a hospital," she said firmly. with a story about being treated by a private physician who's now out of the country. I'll write notes attributing the initial treatment to Dr. Morrison. But he needs real medical care, Victor, not a third-year student pretending she knows what she's doing. Agreed. 3 days, maybe 4, as soon as he's stable. Victor stood, his exhaustion visible now that the crisis had passed. I'll have Elena arrange everything. Transportation, records, a story that holds up to scrutiny. And after this? She looked up at him. After tonight, we're done. No more emergency calls, no more asking me to practice medicine I'm not licensed for. I'll consult, I'll give advice, but I'm not doing this again. She expected him to argue, to remind her of the contract, to leverage his power and her debt. Instead, he nodded. After tonight, things change. You're right to draw that line. He paused. But I need you to know, what you did here matters. Marcus is 24, he's kind and brilliant and studying architecture, and he has his whole life ahead of him because you refused to let him die. That's worth something, Alyssa. That's worth everything. She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her anger and her boundaries and her sense of righteousness. But Marcus was alive. His chest rose and fell with steady breathing. The monitor showed a heartbeat that wouldn't exist without her. That had to count for something. Elena drove her home as the sun rose, painting the California sky in shades of gold and pink that felt too beautiful for how exhausted and scared she was. She didn't speak during the drive, just watched the landscape blur past and tried to process what she'd done. David was waiting on her doorstep, his face haggard with worry. "Where the hell have you been? You didn't answer your phone, you weren't at the hospital." He stopped when he saw her clothes, still stained with blood despite her attempts to clean up. "Jesus, what happened?" "I can't tell you. Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Alyssa, I saved someone's life tonight." The words came out flat, emotionless. "And I might have violated so many medical ethics rules that I could lose everything. But he's alive. So I'm going to take a shower and sleep for 12 hours, and then I'm going to figure out how to live with what I did." She walked past him into her apartment, closed the door, and stood under scalding water until her skin turned red and the shaking finally stopped. Marcus recovered. 3 days after the surgery, Victor called to tell her he'd been transferred to a private hospital under Dr. Morrison's care with a cover story about being treated at a family estate following a hiking accident. The hospital accepted the story without question. Money and the right connections could make almost anything seem legitimate. "He's going to be okay," Victor said. "Full recovery expected. The surgeon reviewed your work and said it was remarkably skilled given the circumstances." "Which surgeon?" Alyssa asked sharply. "Who else knows what happened?" "Dr. Morrison. That's all. He's bound by physician-patient confidentiality and by loyalty to me. Your name won't appear anywhere in the medical records." She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt hollow, like she'd survived something that had carved out essential parts of who she was. Finals came and went. She passed, though not as well as previous years, the exhaustion and stress finally catching up with her. Fourth year would be easier in some ways. More electives, more control over her schedule, time to apply for residencies and figure out what kind of doctor she wanted to become. Emergency medicine, she realized. Despite everything, despite the trauma and the fear and the impossible responsibility, she wanted to be in the emergency room where seconds mattered and quick thinking saved lives. She applied to programs across the country, but her heart kept pulling her back to the city where she'd grown up. The neighborhoods where kids like her still didn't have access to adequate health care, where the emergency rooms were overwhelmed and understaffed, where doctors like her were desperately needed. Victor's promise about the clinic came back to her in quiet moments. The contract she'd signed felt different now, not like a transaction, but like a partnership, though one weighted heavily in his favor. He'd asked her to compromise her ethics, had put her in impossible situations, had tested her in ways she was still processing. But he'd also kept every promise, had paid for her education, had opened doors she couldn't have opened herself, and now he was offering her the resources to build something that could outlast them both. The question was whether she could accept those resources with integrity intact. She called him in June, 3 weeks before graduation. "I want to talk about the clinic." "I was wondering when you'd call." She could hear the smile in his voice. "What do you have in mind?" "I want it in the South Side, where I grew up. 3 exam rooms minimum, capacity to see at least 50 patients a day, sliding scale fees based on income. Space for a pharmacy so people can get their medications on site instead of having to travel to find somewhere that accepts their insurance. The words poured out, a vision she'd been building for months. Mental health services, pediatric care, programs for chronic disease management, everything the community needs and can't get anywhere else. Send me a proposal, detailed budget, timeline, staffing requirements. I'll review it with my real estate team and we'll find a location. Just like that? Just like that. I made you a promise, Alyssa. I keep my promises. She worked on the proposal for 2 weeks, refining every detail, researching costs and regulations, and grant opportunities. It was the most excited she'd felt about anything since the night she'd returned the wallet. This sense of purpose, of building something that mattered. When she sent it to Victor, his response came within hours. This is exactly what the South Side needs. Let's make it happen. Graduation felt surreal. Alyssa walked across the stage in her cap and gown, accepted her diploma with hands that didn't shake, and looked out at the audience where her mother sat crying, and David cheered, and her entire unlikely journey crystallized into this single moment of accomplishment. She'd done it. Against all odds, against every person who'd said she couldn't, she'd become a doctor. The celebration afterward was small, just family and close friends at a restaurant her mother had chosen. But when Alyssa checked her phone during dinner, she found a message from Victor. Congratulations, Dr. Carter. The world is better for having you in it. Just that. No demands. No reminders of obligations. Just genuine congratulation from someone who'd believed in her when she couldn't afford to believe in herself. She texted back, "Thank you for everything." His response took several minutes. "You earned every bit of this. I just made sure you had the chance to prove it. Now go change the world." Residency started in July at County General, the same hospital where she'd done her emergency medicine rotation. The program was brutal. 80-hour weeks, impossible caseloads, attending physicians who demanded perfection and gave no quarter for exhaustion or fear. But Alyssa thrived in the chaos, found her rhythm in the controlled urgency of the emergency department. She learned to make life or death decisions in seconds, learned to tell families their loved ones hadn't made it, learned to celebrate the saves and grieve the losses, and keep moving because the next patient was already arriving. David matched into psychiatry at a children's hospital across town. They still met for coffee when their schedules aligned, still supported each other through the impossible grind of residency, still reminded each other why they'd chosen this path when the exhaustion made it hard to remember. "You're different now," David told her one night over Chinese takeout in her apartment. "Not bad different, just more sure of yourself, like you know exactly who you are." "I'm still figuring that out," she said honestly. "But I know who I want to be. I know what I'm working toward." "The clinic?" "The clinic." Victor's team found a location. Former urgent care facility, perfect size, right in the heart of the South Side. "We're renovating now. Should be ready to open in 6 months." "That's amazing, Alyssa. Really, you're going to change so many lives." She thought about Marcus, about James, about all the patients she'd seen in the emergency room who couldn't afford follow-up care, who left against medical advice because they couldn't miss work, who chose between medication and rent every single month. "I'm going to try," she said. "That's all any of us can do." The clinic opened on a Saturday in March, 2 years into her residency. The Southside Community Health Center, a name they'd chosen together, Victor's team and hers, something that sounded official and welcoming and like it had always been there. The renovated space gleamed with new paint and modern equipment, 3 exam rooms plus a small pharmacy, a waiting area with comfortable chairs and Spanish-language magazines, and a staff that reflected the community it served. Victor came to the opening but stayed in the background, letting Alyssa greet the community leaders and local officials who'd shown up for the ribbon cutting. When she thanked him privately afterward, he shook his head. "This is your achievement. I just helped make it possible. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Without your help, without your vision, your determination, your refusal to let obstacles stop you, none of this would exist." He looked around the clinic with something that might have been pride. "You've built something that will outlast both of us. That matters, Alyssa. That's the legacy that counts." The clinic saw 37 patients on its first day. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. There was a place now where you could see a doctor, even if you didn't have insurance. where they wouldn't turn you away if you couldn't pay, where the people treating you looked like you and understood where you came from. Alyssa worked at the clinic every weekend, fitting it around her residency schedule, building relationships with patients who became familiar faces. The diabetes patient whose blood sugar was finally under control. The woman whose breast lump had been benign but who needed regular monitoring. The child with asthma who now had a current inhaler and an action plan for emergencies. Every success felt personal. Every life improved felt like vindication of the choices she'd made, the compromises she'd accepted, the lines she'd walked between ethics and necessity. James Lynn came to the clinic in May, walking with a cane but walking nonetheless, a miracle of modern medicine and expensive care and sheer stubborn will to survive. "I wanted to see what you'd built," he told her, looking around the waiting room where families sat chatting in Spanish and English and Chinese. "Victor told me about your vision for this place." "Did he tell you I almost killed his nephew?" The words came out before she could stop them, months of guilt finally surfacing. James smiled gently. "He told me you saved Marcus when no one else could, that you refused to let an impossible situation become a tragedy. That sounds like good medicine to me. I wasn't licensed. I wasn't qualified. I could have, but you didn't. Marcus is finishing his architecture degree. He's designing sustainable housing for low-income communities, using what happened to him as motivation to build something better." James sat down carefully, his recovery still evident in every movement. Victor sees potential in people. Sometimes he pushes them to realize that potential in ways that aren't comfortable, but he's never wrong about who's worth investing in. What if I'd failed? What if Marcus had died? Then Victor would have grieved and blamed himself and moved forward, because that's what he does. But you didn't fail. You rose to an impossible challenge and proved you were exactly who he believed you to be. James looked at her directly. "Stop punishing yourself for saving a life, Dr. Carter. Start celebrating that you're building an entire institution dedicated to saving thousands more." The words settled something in her chest that had been tight since that terrible night. She'd saved Marcus. She'd built this clinic. She'd become the doctor she'd always wanted to be, taking a harder path than she'd imagined, but arriving at the destination nonetheless. Fourth year of residency came with more autonomy, more responsibility, more opportunities to shape her own future. Alyssa was named chief resident, managing schedules and mentoring junior residents and proving she could lead as well as follow. The clinic expanded, adding a second physician and a nurse practitioner, increasing its capacity to 75 patients a day. Victor called less frequently now, no emergencies, no crises, just occasional check-ins to see how she was doing. The dynamic between them had shifted over the years, from patron and recipient to something closer to colleagues, maybe even friends. He attended the clinic's anniversary celebration, donated new equipment without being asked, and connected them with grant programs that could fund expansion. "You don't owe me this," Alyssa told him during the celebration. "The contract's fulfilled. The clinic exists. You've kept your promise. I'm not doing this because of a contract. I'm doing it because what you've built matters. Because you matter." He smiled. "Besides, watching you succeed has been one of the most rewarding investments I've ever made. Not financially. I'll never see a return on the money I've put into your education in this clinic. But in terms of impact, in terms of lives changed, you've given me returns I could never have bought. So we're even?" "We were always even, Alyssa. You just didn't believe it." He paused. The wallet was never about creating debt. It was about finding someone who'd do the right thing when no one was watching. You did. Everything else followed from that single choice. She thought about that night in the diner, about the wallet stuffed with cash, about the decision that had seemed so simple at the time. Return what wasn't hers, do the right thing. She'd thought she was just being honest, just following the principles her mother had instilled in her. She hadn't known she was auditioning for a future she couldn't have imagined. Residency ended on a Tuesday in June. Dr. Alyssa Carter, board-certified in emergency medicine, chief resident, founder and medical director of the Southside Community Health Center, walked out of County General for the last time as a trainee and into a future she'd built one impossible choice at a time. David met her outside, now Dr. David Chen, about to start his fellowship in child psychiatry. They'd survived together, had held each other up through the darkest times, had celebrated every small victory and mourned every patient they couldn't save. "We did it," he said, pulling her into a hug. "We're actually real doctors now. We've been real doctors for 4 years. Fine. We're real doctors who don't have supervising physicians second-guessing everything we do." They went to Rosie's diner because some things were tradition. Rochelle was still there, older and grayer, but still pouring coffee with the same practiced efficiency. "Look at you too," she said, eyes shining with tears. "Doctors. Real doctors. I knew you'd make it, baby girl. I always knew." They stayed for hours, drinking coffee and eating pie and talking about the future. David's fellowship would focus on trauma-informed care for children in foster care. Alyssa would split her time between the emergency department and her clinic, finally able to practice medicine the way she'd always dreamed, helping everyone who needed it, not just those who could afford it. Her phone buzzed as they were leaving. Text from Victor. "The property next to your clinic just went on the market. Thought you might want to expand. Call me if you're interested." She looked at the message for a long moment. He was still offering opportunities, still seeing potential for growth, still investing in her vision. The dynamic between them had evolved, but the fundamental truth remained. He believed in her, and that belief had changed her life. She texted back, "Let's talk about it. And Victor, thank you for everything, for seeing something in me I didn't see in myself." His response came quickly. "You always had it, Alyssa. I just made sure the world got to see it too. Now go change that world. I'll be watching." She slipped her phone into her pocket and walked out of the diner into the warm June evening, into a future she'd built from wallet returns and midnight emergencies and impossible choices that had seemed like tests, but were really just opportunities to prove who she already was. The girl who'd returned $6,000 when she was drowning in debt. The woman who'd saved a stranger's life even when she wasn't qualified. The doctor who'd refused to let circumstances dictate her limitations. She'd paid the price of integrity, sleepless nights and ethical compromises and responsibility that nearly crushed her. But she'd also reaped its rewards. A career she loved. A clinic that served thousands. A future built on the foundation of doing the right thing, even when it cost everything. The wallet had been a test, but not the kind Victor Hahn had intended. It hadn't tested whether she was honest. That was never in question. It had tested whether she could hold on to her principles while navigating a world that constantly demanded compromise, whether she could accept help without losing herself, whether she could transform obligation into opportunity. She'd passed. Not perfectly, not without scars, but she'd passed. And now, finally, the only person whose expectations she needed to meet was herself. Dr. Alyssa Carter walked down the street where she'd once bussed tables and counted pennies and dreamed impossible dreams. The clinic's sign glowed in the distance, a beacon for everyone who'd been told they didn't matter, who'd been denied care, who'd been written off by a system designed to exclude them. She'd built that. With Victor's help, yes, but also with her own determination, her own vision, her own refusal to accept that some people deserved health while others deserved suffering. The wallet had changed everything. But the choice had always been hers. From that first phone call to this moment, walking into a future where integrity wasn't a burden but a foundation, where the girl from the Southside Projects had become exactly who she'd always meant to be. A healer, a leader, a doctor who understood that sometimes the right choice was the hard choice. And that was okay, because hard choices were the ones that mattered most. She pulled out her phone one last time, looked at Victor's message about expansion, and smiled. There was more work to do. There always would be. But for the first time in her life, she had the resources, the support, and the authority to do it her way. The price of integrity had been high. But the return on that investment was incalculable. Lives saved, futures changed, a legacy that would outlast her. That was worth every sleepless night, every impossible choice, every moment of doubt. That was worth everything.